Hello. It was a talk that I gave at the 2023 American Ornithological Society and Society for Canadian Ornithologists meeting in London, Ontario in August of 23. It's about the unpopularity of changing all eponymous bird names. There is really no more contentious subject in the history of biology than organismal names. This is because people are passionate about these names. Disagreement has been continuous for over 2 centuries. If you tell me that you disagree with me about bird names, I'm going to say thanks for getting the main point of my talk. This disagreement has not just been continuous, it's also been rather vehement at times. This is probably not the lever to pull to promote universal happiness and joy. Eponyms in particular have come in for disfavor over the period of these 2 centuries. Strickland et al. In 1843 complained about authors who were attempting on the most frivolous pretexts to cancel the terms established by their original discoverers and to substitute a new and unauthorized nomenclature in their place. One author lays down as a rule X, another declares war against Y, a third excommunicates Z, a fourth cancels all names which are complementary of individuals, and so on until universality and permanence, the two greatest essentials of scientific language, are utterly destroyed. A little over 100 years ago, Lewis wrote an article in the Auk in which he had several propositions to improve North American avian nomenclature. Proposition 4 stated that the name of a human being shall not be used as the English language name of a bird, and any such names at present authorized shall be replaced by other appropriate terms. Most recently, Foley and Rutter in 2020 stated that these honorific names, known as eponyms, also cast long, dark shadows over our beloved birds and represent colonialism, racism, and inequality. It's long overdue that we acknowledge the problem of such names, and it is long overdue that we should change them. What's new this time around? Two things: Eurocentric colonialism and social media. The latter is particularly pernicious today. This is the cover of Science, the journal that appeared in late July, just before this meeting, showing us in cartoon form something that we know quite well from our use of social media in society. It's very easy to find like-minded people and form intellectual bubbles, if you will, or echo chambers that communicate among like-minded people. And this medium tends also to divide unlike-minded people so that we wind up talking more to each other, more to ourselves than to each other. This becomes important. Well, eponyms are not inherently bad. We use them every day in our lives in Western society. They're both popular and common. We've got terms like Obamacare, Bidenomics, Timbits, those wonderful donut holes that you can get in Canada. Cities, mountains, lakes, streets, bridges, buildings, all often have eponymous names. Our own surnames are eponymous. And of course, birds. There are over 4,000 eponymous bird names between English and scientific names. Foley and Rutter published their piece opposing eponymous bird names in the Washington Post in 2020. Daryl Fears published an article on the same topic also in the Washington Post in 2021. The Washington Post is a rather well-respected left-leaning newspaper published in Washington, D.C., and they allow their subscribers to post comments on their articles. These comments are in a moderated forum, and again, it's only subscribers who can post. Hundreds of people responded to these two articles, and I took those comments and applied sensitivity analysis to them. This sensitivity analysis determines whether a comment is positive or negative, or its polarity. And I also scored the magnitude of the comments, small, medium, or large, in their reaction, either positive or negative. The majority of people opposed this proposal. The ratio of opposition for the Foley and Rutter proposal was 3.4 to 1 in opposition. The ratio for the Fears article was 2.3 to 1 in opposition, with again hundreds of people responding. In sum, 70 to 77% of commenters were opposed to this proposal to change all eponymous bird names. Now, these are suboptimal surveys and we need better data, but they're not without value. In fact, we use data and analyses like these every day for online evaluations that we do of things, products, and services that we might wish to purchase. As a check on this, I did analyze another data set. Guedes et al. Made a parallel proposal to eliminate eponymous names from scientific nomenclature. They published their paper in Science, in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, and then they posted it to the social media platform for scientists called ResearchGate. ResearchGate also allows its registered users to post comments. This had a lot of comments, and again, they were quite strongly negative. In fact, they were much more strongly negative than the other data sets examined. This one had a 9.5 to 1 opposition ratio, and meaning that 90% of scientist commenters were opposed to eliminating eponymous scientific names. Overall, these three data sets showed 70 to 90% of commenters being opposed to the elimination of eponymous names, and the sample size was not bad at over 1,000 commenters. Now, disagreement over eponymous bird names shouldn't surprise us because disagreement over names has been so rampant, but these are the first data to suggest what levels of disagreement there might be, particularly with respect to eponymous names. Now, we need better data, but it does seem clear that this topic is both divisive and polarizing. When you read down into the comments themselves, what you find are some very interesting things. Divisions also occur within the in-group. This means that left-leaning people who might otherwise be allies frequently disagree with this approach. The topic is taken immediately into politics and the culture wars. That's not good. And reasons for disagreement are often well thought out. This isn't just a ranking or a tallying of knee-jerk anti-change reactions. And we have a blind spot where this topic is concerned. An unpopular action might nevertheless be the right course to take. Is eliminating all eponymous bird names one of these? I will argue probably not. Let's look at these quotes. First from Foley and Rudder. They told us that eponyms represent colonialism, racism, and inequality, and as a consequence, we should change them. Guedes et al. Said that those commemorated were almost universally white, male, upper-class Europeans. The problem here is that we can't treat this group of individuals as members of a group, whether that's ethnicity or the times in which they live. They can't be proxies for things that we don't like about those group memberships. We call that discrimination. It's against our ethical code. We really have to treat others the way we would have ourselves be treated. Rohan Pethiagoda called out this maneuver for being a new form of colonialism. He felt that it harms global scientists whose first language is not English. He stated, I contend that the US would do better to solve its social and political problems rather than renaming them, and especially rather than exporting them. Let's say that we decide that the ends justify the means and we eliminate all eponymous names. Anyway, there are also negative practical consequences. Canceling one name to raise another for cultural reasons will polarize people with a winner-loser dynamic. You've basically taken a shared resource for your own, and as you can expect, people would disagree about that. It has the effect of poisoning common ground. This is the logo of the meeting, the 2023 Ornithological Conference, Birds as Bridges. And in fact, I commonly use birds as bridges to communicate effectively with people who don't think alike, who come from different backgrounds and have different beliefs. Friends and family, neighbors, students, visitors to our museum, donors. Birds give us some common ground with which we can pull together and unite. If instead we kick birds into the culture wars, as this proposal seems to do, we're contesting over birds between unlike-minded groups. This is the culture wars, and I'm going to reference Liam Bright's important paper on this at the end of the talk. We have to recognize that our taxonomic lists have been enormously successful in inclusion. Bordell et al. In studying birdwatching said that if birding participation represented growth in the customer base of an industry, market analysts would tell us that the industry is doing quite well. In fact, they would probably tell us that the industry is doing great. The checklist of North and Middle American birds of the American Ornithological Society is the scientific basis for avian diversity and its management and conservation in North America. It's also the authority for North American bird names used by field guides and major global checklists. It's difficult to estimate our audience size, but it's probably around 100 million or more. Scientists have been a core user group since the beginning, and there are now more non-native than native English speakers using English for science. This is important because practicing science in a language that is not your first language has many costs. Tatsuya Amano and his co-authors are estimating, tallying up, and quantifying what those costs are. Shared lexicons of pared down simple words that are standardized that everyone uses makes it easier for someone without English as a first language to participate in an English-based science. That's what our bird lists are to many people. Changing and destabilizing those lists have inherently exclusionary effects, and we're not accounting for that in our push to make changes. Let's look at another field that's had more practice, in fact, a couple of decades more practice in dealing with eponymous names, the health sciences. When neurologists have a choice between using an eponym or a non-eponymous alternative name, they prefer the eponymous name by 2 to 1. For cases of eponyms deemed unacceptable because they commemorate people whose actions were reprehensible in their time, medicine shows a nomenclatural response of curtailing usage of eponymous names associated with the worst of these, such as Nazi atrocities, while at the same time, overall use of eponyms continues to increase. Finding a good dog catches car story, medical anatomists succeeded in a top-down effort to standardize their terminology without eponymous names, and yet the approved terminology has still not been accepted 20 years later. The moral of the story, or the lesson we can take from the health sciences, is that we need to deal carefully in a one-on-one, case-by-case basis with these names. Eponyms not only are not bad, they can also serve as gateways in a positive effect. They can serve as gateways by providing a simple mnemonic term for an organism, condition, or process, and by promoting an interest in the people and history of a field. They also serve to humanize science, which fits well with U.S. science standards. I have a picture example of how this works effectively in birds. Swainson's warbler has had only that English name since the species was described in the early 1800s. And this is a Google Ngrams view of the occurrence of not only the English name, but the 3 different scientific names that Swainson's warbler has had over 2 centuries. You can see that learning Swainson's warbler gives you an immediate gateway into not only that historic literature, but also to speak effectively with your contemporaries about that organism. You can also see from this diagram that changing Swainson's warbler to another new name, simply because it's an eponym, produces an immediate barrier. It's a barrier in communication with your contemporaries who learned it as Swainson's warbler, and it's a barrier to that deep historic literature on that organism. We have a second blind spot often in this topic, and that is the idea that there can be only one. That quote comes from a cult classic movie called Highlander and can be entertaining, but it's a Western framework. It traps us in vertical and binary positions and creates a zero-sum game. By focusing all our activities in this framework, we're greatly limiting our potential. We're simply tending the garden of colonialism in our nomenclature. And don't be fooled, removing the names of individuals from that nomenclature does absolutely zero to decolonize those lists. Because we're working in the same languages of English and Latin, despite the terms that we're using, and you cannot find 2 more colonialist languages in the history of our planet. We'll be more productive if we work horizontally within and across languages and cultures, and we can achieve new scales of inclusion. Some folks have said, well, let's swap eponymous names for indigenous names. You know the story. Our ancestors did terrible things to your ancestors, but we feel bad about it. Here, we've planted one of your words in our overwhelmingly English list of bird names. Welcome. Few people are fooled by this. This is tokenism. These would be linguistic micro-reservations, effectively only emphasizing how completely English has squelched other cultures and languages. Instead, why not welcome entire indigenous terminologies and knowledge, standing them up independently alongside of ours, and develop comprehensive links to our necessarily colonialist English-Latin framework? That's welcoming, that's decolonizing, and that brings the full value of diversity to the many questions and concerns that we all have about birds. Using our naming systems as master keys to humanity's rich cultural and linguistic heritage about birds, and bringing along vernacular languages and knowledge can have large and immediate positive effects in inclusion and conservation. And here I illustrate 2 fantastic works that show how those 2 different directions can progress. Before I close, a couple things. Best paper I've read in the past 5 years is this by Liam Bright, White Psychodrama. He lays out the landscape of the social difficulties that we're having now as we improve our culture and lives in the world. This presentation is based on two papers of mine, both available in preprints at these addresses. But again, before we go, one more thing. I want to debunk a couple of myths. People say, oh, but bird names change all the time. In fact, they don't change they change slowly. The rate of substantive English bird names has been less than one per year change in the past century. Another myth is that a bird's name should mean something about the bird. Absolutely not. This violates a linguistic principle that goes back 2,500 years. Our names for things are often arbitrary. This is also a core principle of taxonomy and nomenclature. Decoupling names from meaning, names are often only labels, and decoupling names from systematics, relationships are often not reflected in the names, are two of the most important developments of the 19th century for useful systems of nomenclature. And with that, I'll close. Again, here are the URLs and citations that I think are most important from this presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'll close.